All right, folks. Hey, I'm Muttle, Brian, John, Thomas, Brian of London, and I are doing another little. We haven't come up with a name for this. We just want to put stuff out, Brian. I think we have, we live in a place where there's a lot to talk about, and you and I like to talk.
That's right. And we will come up with a name, but now it's the Nameless Podcast.
Right. And you could find this on my channel, Reb Mottle, and you could also find this on Brian of London, or you could tweet us. We're out there. But anyway, there was another terror attack yesterday, Brian, in Gush which is where I live. And again, it's a little too close to home. It's my son goes to yeshiva, goes to an academy of higher Jewish learning. He's 17 years old. And he goes there, and he was supposed to be on his way home through that intersection when a Palestinian terrorist drove a car, and they're ready for it there. It's like it's really like it's suicide by soldier at this point, because there's barriers up. They drive into the barrier, the car stops, they have a knife in the car, and 16, 18-year-old soldiers shoot them dozens of times. And we've seen this over and over and again, but they're still doing it. Is it that much hatred that they have?
It seems to be. Now, I saw this I just saw the tweets of this yesterday. You can't even keep up here. Did this guy, did he die in the crash or
No.
No, he was really shot.
Full of holes.
Oh yeah, good. Okay, well, that's what happens. But and that's the thing, is it swerves to hit someone, swerves to hit a pedestrian. There's an act. This is it. There's intention. There is an intentional act to kill a Jew. That's it's never an accident. And then for days we get the kind of, first it gets ignored. This is the other thing, is this is the low level of terrorism, what we call low level terrorism, that gets ignored and won't get mentioned ever, or only if we respond in some way and go kick down some doors in Ramallah or Hebron. That's it.
Well, I mean, there's a couple things that jump out at me. First is, when people talk about checkpoints, this Route 60 through Gush Etzion, it goes from, it's actually the ancient road. It follows the ancient route. This road, I mean, it's a new highway, but it's an old route from the time of the patriarchs. For thousands of years, we found Roman mile markers along it. This was the route that people took thousands of years ago to get from Beersheba up to Hebron, from Hebron to Jerusalem, from Jerusalem to Beit El, from Beit El to Shechem, Nablus. And we, there are no checkpoints along that road.
I drove it in November last year when I had visitors here. I drove from the very, very north. We went into the, it's Samaria in the north. Mm-hmm. I drove in right at the top, drove all the way down past Nablus, Shechem, all the way round the Tepuach Junction is at the north, and kept going. And that's the way of the patriarchs. I mean, and when you drive down it, if you even have the most basic knowledge of the Bible, every place name that you see pointing off it is a name that's famous from the Bible.
Well, basically the entire Bible took place along this Route 60. Everything that you read in there, when we say Judea and Samaria, I was talking to some Christian friends, and they were like, oh, you live in Judea and Samaria. And I was like, no, I live in Judea.
Yeah.
These are two different regions, but they're, one south of Jerusalem is Judea, north of Jerusalem is Samaria, and
I mean, Jerusalem is like it's the border, it's the middle. It's right in the middle, and that was the point of Jerusalem. It was the coming together of all these different tribes.
Right.
And so it's not Judea, it's not Samaria, it's the one in the middle.
Right, exactly. And I don't think it's an accident that this is why this is hotly contested. You guys can have Tel Aviv, is what they're saying, because Tel Aviv is almost where your heartland is. But really, the cradle of Jewish civilization for thousands of years has been along this Route 60, stretching up this on the mountain range that goes from Beersheba in the south up to Shechem, Nablus up in the north.
Yeah. And the other thing, there's another road, 90, which is the one that's down in the valley,
right?
Which runs parallel. Anyway, the geography is amazing, but again, you're right. You drive that, from an Israeli sort of standpoint, you enter Route 60 in the north or the south at a checkpoint, and then there's pretty much nothing on that road. Not one checkpoint that stops traffic from the north to the very south. And from an Israeli point of view, that's great. You just breeze through it. But the road is mixed with Palestinian plated cars with these white number plates that are different from the Israeli number plates we have in Tel Aviv or the rest of the country. And it's very obvious that it's not an apartheid highway, because it's totally mixed traffic.
Right. And any of them could drive to my house. Don't get any ideas, by the way. We've got a dog and guns and things like that. But there is that freedom of movement, and when that freedom of movement is curbed, where it's curbed, simply because you have these Palestinians that are doing things like this, that are driving
that was the other big
cars
story
into Jews.
That was the big story yesterday as well. The one that won't make the front pages of the New York Times or anywhere else, I suspect. I've gone looking very briefly, but it's about the positioning I'd like to know of this story. This was the coming out of Gaza, where there is a massive, checkpoint operation. The area's crossing. It looks like an airport. I visited there. It's like an airport with proper airport security going in and out. And at areas crossing, 2 Palestinian Arab women, both nurses apparently, one with cancer,
2 sisters,
were stopped. 2 sisters in an ambulance. It was an ambulance, right?
Well, I'm looking at the story here.
I've seen an ambulance. I couldn't figure out whether they were in the ambulance or not.
According to Judah Ari Gross in Times of Israel, he says 2 sisters trying to smuggle explosives into Israel from Gaza using tubes labeled for medication, taking advantage of an entry permit issued for one of them to seek cancer treatment in Israel. So we issued her a cancer treatment. You have cancer? All right, you could come in, and where would you rather go in the Middle East for cancer treatment?
Yeah, well, all of the senior Palestinian figures and even relatives of Hamas figures come to Israel. There's a hospital like a 10-minute walk from my house. That's the like premier private hospital in Tel Aviv. That's where I think Abbas's wife was here, or no, who was it? No, it was the Hamas guys. His daughter.
Oh, the Hamas guys.
That's
right.
where they come.
Yeah.
They come to this hospital, 10 minutes from my house, and these 2 were coming in from Gaza, and they choose that route to try and send some explosives to blow up Jews. And what are we going to do? We have to check everything. So, so then there'll be a story of a woman delayed at a checkpoint because she's pregnant or she's got cancer. We must do it. Why we let them in the first place is it's obviously an act of extraordinary, it's who we are. But boy, it makes you really question ourselves.
That's what, if you're Palestinian and watching this, and I live in the West Bank, I'm what you call a West Bank settler. We don't want to oppress you. We will if you try and kill us, but that's not what we want. And I think you have to always ask yourself, whenever you're in any kind of conflict about anything, a piece of good advice I got is you have to ask, what do they want? What is it that they really want? If you ask yourself,
look through their eyes.
Look through the other person's eyes. And if you're on the other side of this conflict and you come across this YouTube video, ask yourself, I'm looking at this guy, Mottle. He lives in the West Bank. He's a West Bank settler. What is it that I really want? We are not here to oppress Palestinians. We're not here to steal land. There's plenty of land. We're here to live and live in peace. And if you would just stop being such assholes for 2 seconds and driving cars into us, then we're happy to live in peace with you. That was my public service announcement message there for.
That's it. That's another one. And I mean, I'm always like, I'm looking one step outside. I'm looking at not just the story. That's not even an unusual story, unfortunately. They've used medical transports before to try and smuggle weapons and arms. We've found guns in ambulances, the whole thing. There's a whole history of this. It's what does the media do, and what perception does that give people outside who are not coming to our show for information? If you stick with the New York Times, you will not hear about this, or if you do, it'll be on page 19, it'll be at 3 lines, that's it. But the importance is, in 6 months' time, when somebody, God forbid, dies because they don't get the cancer treatment they wanted in Gaza, because they weren't given a permit, and we find out that they're somehow related to these 2 sisters, well, the background that we caught 2 sisters, one with cancer, trying to take explosives into Israel, that won't be in your mind when you read the story later, and boom, you know, evil Jews, the evil Jews will be once again oppressing the poor people of Gaza. I mean, it's like my favorite. This is kind of somewhat during the last 2014 war. It happens in every war. Nobody ever dies of cancer or heart disease during the period of a war in Gaza. None. It's a miraculous cure for cancer and cure for heart disease and all other natural cause death. Basically, there are no natural causes deaths while any soldier of Israel is inside Gaza. So every death is attributed to the IDF.
Right, when they're in there skinning babies.
Correct. So, right. But it's that perception. Boom, fake. And this is the phenomenon we've come to call fake news now. It's not that they're not going to lie and say Israel stops people getting cancer treatment outright. But what they're going to do is not mention the reasons why we have to be careful about it. And that gives a false impression, which is fake. A fake impression. You don't have to lie, but the news gives a completely fake impression by missing out the context.
Right, completely removing the context from it. Yeah, I mean, Palestinians invented fake news. You know, the whole kind of their entire issue. There is so much that's not real, and that always blows me away. You know what, Brian? There's another piece of fake news that I saw here that is, like you said, it's mixed with the real news. Did you see the New York? I'm sure you did. The New York Times article with Marwan Barghouti, the Palestinian Nelson Mandela. I know. By the way, and do you know what Nelson Mandela was in prison for?
Yeah. He was planting bombs. I don't think any of his bombs ever killed anyone, though.
I don't think. You know what? That may or may not be true. What he was sentenced for was inciting people to strike, right, to go on strike, and which is a peaceful.
No, he was connected. There was definitely elements of terrorism in the ANC. I was born in South Africa. I left there when I was a baby, but. So I was aware, I used to go back at Christmas time, and it was called Christmas, and I was there as a child remembering limpet mines going off in waste paper baskets in Durban and such, and these were small, and they sometimes killed people, 1 or 2. They were not like huge Pigua events like Israel had, but there was real terrorism, and the ANC was connected with that, and Nelson Mandela was part of that. Now, so the background was ropey, but he went to prison for a very long time, and in prison he completely renounced violence. This is the point. This is why Barghouti is not a Nelson Mandela.
Well, also the difference between being imprisoned for inciting a strike, a general strike, and Barghouti is in prison. He was convicted in a civilian court, right? Yeah. We are the only democracy in this region. He had a fair trial. Evidence was brought, and he was convicted on 5 counts of murder. Because those were the 5 counts that were just over the top, cut and dry, He didn't even offer a defense at his trial. He said that this is an illegitimate court. I will not do that. But the truth is, he couldn't offer a defense because he was caught dead to rights. This is a guy,
and he was proud of it.
And he was
being
proud of it. This is a guy that has
and
gone
some
out.
of those attacks were in Tel Aviv. So you can't even come with which he did later on. He claimed it was only against settlers.
Right, but he blew up a seafood market. He blew up a seafood market in Tel Aviv, killing 2 people. This is a murderer. This is a guy who's gone out to murder civilians, and they're literally nominating him for a Nobel Peace Prize. Like, that's their whole idea. They want him, and we could end up seeing him, I mean, as crazy as it sounds, leading the Palestinian people. They're trying to brand him, like I said, as the Palestinians' Nelson Mandela. And, I think that that's an incredibly telling thing. Like, the Palestinians' Nelson Mandela murders civilians. And
he's unrepentant. He really is unrepentant.
Right.
He's never once said, I really regret murdering Israeli Jews. Never.
Right. Because he doesn't.
And that's unthinkable, because he doesn't.
And if he did, he wouldn't be as popular.
Yeah.
If he
and
came
the story
out,
was that the New York Times published and basically it was the most, that's the other thing, is, I mean, you read the thing, it's the most, like, banal whining about prison conditions. And I mean, these people really, they're whining that they don't have cell phones, they don't have Wi-Fi, they don't have enough channels on their televisions. Meanwhile, I think there's like 10,000 Palestinians in Syrian prisons, and I bet you every single one of them would beg to be transferred to an Israeli prison today.
Right. It's like the pedophile who's upset that he doesn't have Nickelodeon, and it's violating his human rights.
The whole thing was, and of course, the New York Times, the first time they published this, and of course, in the paper version, this is the important thing, they publish it and they just say he's a politician, and he happens to be in prison. No reason given.
Right. The New York Times, again, when you talk about no context, they said that Marwan Barghouti is what do they call him? An activist,
activist,
a political activist, and a parliamentarian. It sounds like we arrested Abraham Lincoln.
And it sounds like we put him in prison for political reasons. That's the most bit. And he was only this thing of saying, and he was, by the way, at the time, and with all the convictions, he was working as a terrorist for Fatah. Not Hamas, Fatah, the ruling party of the Palestinian Authority. And so to call Fatah a political party is really, they're a terrorist organization with the veneer of politics.
For sure.
That's what they are. They still are.
For sure. Wow. So, yeah, things don't change.
That's
Brian, the other
But there
piece
was
of
some
context,
good news before.
Okay, let's talk about some good news.
Yeah, I mean, just before Pesach, I got a phone call from Kay Wilson, a friend, who in 2010 survived a terrorist attack. I mean, a complete jihadi, Allahu Akbar, 2 guys hacking at her with a machete. Now, unfortunately, she was with a Christian friend from America.
They were on a hike.
Her friend
they were
Christine
on a hike in Beit Shemesh.
They were on a hike, yeah. And her friend Christine Lucan, she didn't survive. She was murdered by these 2. And Kay survived almost probably by a miracle. It's astonishing how she managed to survive. And in the process, she did manage to stab one of these 2 terrorists in the leg with her penknife. And that proved instrumental in helping track these 2 down, who were then also found guilty of other crimes. They were tracked down, caught, arrested, went through a trial at which Kay had to sit there looking at them. And they were put away for a very long time. Multiple life sentences and extra years. But they had killed an American. Kay's friend, Christine Lucan, was American. And
not a Jew.
Since 2010, not a Jew.
Which makes her even worth more.
And except
now you're
killing
non-Jewish Americans. That's terrorism. We call that terrorism. Yeah. That's not freedom fighting.
Yeah. No. Well, and the terrorists themselves, actually, when they were told, it's in the court documents, when they understood that they'd killed, that the Jew had lived and the Christian had died, they expressed that they were upset because they'd really wanted to kill Jews. You know, why did you go there? They were asked in the trial, and to kill Jews. That, you know. Right. But anyway, the part of the story that changed was that just before Pesach, with a quiet little press release, the U.S. Justice Department, I'm going to say my particle, you know, under Attorney General Sessions, appointed by Trump, they've changed something. They have issued arrest warrants. The FBI has issued arrest warrants for these two, and they have been charged. You know, I think a grand jury was convened and charges were issued for these two terrorists for killing an American in Israel. And this hasn't been the norm. And in fact, this Justice Department also issued arrest warrants for another woman, Alam Tamimi, who's in Jordan, who is free. She was convicted of organizing the Sbarro pizzeria bombing, which was one of the most heinous crimes ever.
And you see her deliberately there's that video interview of her where she's where she's smiling at the fact that that 8 of them were children. 8 of the victims were children.
Yeah, she was, and in fact, that was an attack that was timed. It was a pizzeria, and it was timed at just after school when all the little kids go there, and it killed the daughter of a friend of mine. Arnold Roth and his wife Frimet lost their daughter in that horrible attack. She was murdered, and this woman was proud of it. She played the massive role. She drove the bomber to the attack. And she was in prison in Israel, and she was released as part of the Gilad Shalit deal, and she now lives in Jordan free. And now the Americans have put her on the FBI's most wanted list, and there is an arrest warrant out for her, and they've asked the Jordanians for extradition, and the king has said no. You know, he's under enormous pressure, obviously.
Right.
But what's new is America suddenly cares about its citizens being killed by Palestinians. And that's a very big deal. I think it sends an enormous message that it doesn't matter what your cause is, you murder Americans abroad, and the full weight of the American system is going to come after you. I think that's fantastic.
I think that's fantastic also. And I'm a pretty big critic of Trump, and I'm not a fan of Jeff Sessions, that's for sure. You know, if you would lay off pot laws a little bit and do more stuff like this, that would be a step in the right direction. But
again, this is hardly reported. Even in the Israeli press, this hasn't had a lot of attention.
Well, what's crazy to me, Brian, with this stuff is the fact that they want these people back, that these are their national heroes. There's nobody protesting to get that, you know, when you had the Dawabasha family that was murdered by an Israeli and they arrested the guy. No one's talking about getting him out in a prisoner exchange. He's not a hero. The people who burned that horrendous crime after the funeral of the 3 boys, where they burned Muhammad al-Qadar. No one is talking about getting those aren't national heroes to anybody. We are embarrassed when we have someone that goes after and kills innocent civilians. The Palestinian side makes these heroes. These are their national heroes. This woman drove a suicide bomber and killed 8 children and 10 other people
She then went on the news and read it. She was a newsreader. This is even the sickest part. After she dropped the bomber off, she drove back. She read the nightly news bulletin announcing the attack that she had created. So you know this?
Yeah.
I mean, it's insane.
When people talk about the idea that we're opposed to a 2-state solution, you know, I always say that I would not be if the Palestinians were Canadians, we would have no trouble doing that. But instantly. You have a people that glorifies this, that cheers this. You see what's happening in Syria. You see what's happening in Egypt. You see what's happening in Lebanon. You see what's happening in this entire region. This is why we will not tolerate a Palestinian state, because they don't deserve a state, because who they are a people, a nation, if you will, if you can even call them that cheers this and carries out these crimes and elevates the criminals who commit them to heroes, and then work hard to try and get them out. So kudos to America for trying to put a stop to that. And if supposedly what I read is that if these murderers are released in a future prisoner deal, when they step out of an Israeli prison, there will be FBI agents there to arrest them on the spot.
That's exactly right. It's somewhat academic with these two. One hopes that they'll never see the sky again. But
there are worse people who have been let go in prisoner deals.
Correct. And I think that it puts big pressure now on. Look, I think the Israeli public are in a very different place than they were when the Gilad Shalit deal was done. I can't foresee any swap of significant prisoners, even, for at the moment, all the Palestinians are holding they're holding bodies, which is horrific enough. But there would be zero support of releasing anybody in return for a body today, right? I mean, that's my feeling of the Israeli people.
Right. I mean, and it's...
We've done that in the past. We have released live prisoners for dead bodies.
Yeah, for sure. What else is going on, Brian? How was your Passover?
Passover is so interesting in Israel. Again, as a Jew that didn't follow all of this stuff when I was outside of Israel, I love the fact that I'm guided towards, eating matzah for 8 days, that the availability of
7 days.
Bread. 7 days, sorry.
we're here in the land now. Those people ate it for eight days.
Yeah, you're right. But yeah, it's a very special time. Everything does change. And that's what, and it's the other thing is how you're not building your Judaism around other people. You don't have to make any excuses or apologies for not going to work for a day or two here or there. The whole place just shuts down. We shut our company down. We didn't bother opening it on the days between the start and the end of Pesach, because there is nobody on the other end of the phone line. So it's a unique thing that I think Jews outside who don't live in a kind of Jewish ghetto feeling. If you're religious in America and you live in a Jewish community and all of that stuff, might not feel so different. But for the sort of secularish Jew, that's where Israel becomes very, very different.
Well, I mean, I think that's the whole thing about it, is that I think in the exile, holidays like Passover became religious observances. And you really feel it here in Israel, that what it is it's a national festival. Yes, it is. I mean, it becomes horrific to take the kids anywhere because everywhere's packed. But, there's a certain element of fun to that too. And you do go out and do a couple of things. I didn't leave my house. I did not go for an entire week. I did not go further than the synagogue away from, which is about 200 yards from my house. We stayed at home. We barbecued. My friends had, we live in a unique environment, living in a quote unquote settlement. I prefer the term Jewish village. It's actually almost like living in 1950. Our kids can run around here. So the kids they were off school, we were home, and they were basically free range for a week. They would run out and play with their friends. Their friends would come back here. We barbecued. I had this, I barbecued lamb for the first time.
Oh, wow.
Not but first time I bought like an entire
leg.
An entire quarter.
Wow.
So it had the rack, and I went on YouTube and I found out how to break it down, and I took the bone out of the shoulder and had a whole shoulder roast and did the whole thing on the barbecue. It was very much Passover-like. I think it was very much like people would have been doing 2,000 years ago here over Passover. And I got that feeling. I ate it on matzah with bitter herbs, and it was delicious. It was a great, the ancient shawarma there.
Yes. there's nothing better. And I also did a barbecue on the day after the Chag, the first Chag. Fantastic, and the weather turned nice, and you know, it's a great feel. It's a feeling of being Jewish, which isn't only religious. It's all the other elements. It's tradition, it's culture, it's values, it's all those other parts that make up Jewishness in Israel, and it feels right here.
Yeah. It's not a Jewish holiday here. It's a Judean holiday.
That's right.
And
yeah, I also, you know, I live in a secular neighborhood, but it's small in that my kids are now 10 and almost 8, and they can walk around on their own. And, you know, the 10-year-old specifically can go off to friends, and I'm happy with that in the neighborhood. The school's down the street. There's no school run with the cars. There's a neighborhood feeling here, and I think a lot more people have that here than Americans realize. And it changes life in very good ways.
Right. We're living the American dream in the West Bank, I always say.
Yeah. And I think that's a good note to end on until the next time we pull this together.
All right, man. This is fun doing this, talking about, you know, throwing some current event stuff in, what's happening here in Israel, what's happening other places. It's good to have someone like you, Brian, that's interested in the same things. And, you know, I hope people enjoy this chat also. If you do, wherever you're watching this, hit subscribe. Share it with your friends. That's a big thing. Share this on social media. Let's get some interesting conversation about the land of Israel here out there to folks. And, you know, especially I would love this to get into the hands of some Israel haters, because I think we're presenting a different approach. And if you hate Israel, if you wish the Jewish people weren't here, if you wish that the UN could just come in and just swoop us out of here, and that's your biggest dream, let us know what you think about this conversation, and we're totally open to having that conversation and with you. And, you know, as long as you do it in a nice and respectful way, I think the more we talk, the better. All right, Brian of London, thank you very much, folks.
Thanks very much.
Reb Mottle at Twitter, Brian of London on Twitter. Let us know what you think of this.